The enemy of my prayer is the prayer of my enemy, on the discovery of topographics as a philosophical breakthrough in conflict cartography, by Lyle A. Everstone, Ph.D. candidate, Department of Comparative Philosophy and Counterlanguage, University of Cascadia, 2045. Introduction: a fragment that split the sky. There are fragments, and then there are fissures, breaks in the linguistic field where new categories of thought slip through. The anonymous fragment titled Topographics, scribbled in the barely legible ink of an eccentric hand, contains just one sentence. The enemy of my prayer is the prayer of my enemy. For decades, this line lived in obscurity, dismissed as cryptic or merely poetic. But now, 20 years later, it is increasingly recognized as a foundational utterance in the emergence of topographics, a theory and discipline whose impact spans metaphysics, linguistics, conflict studies, and theology. What I aim to do here is unpack how this fragment doesn't merely state an idea, it initiates a new way of reading reality. It is both a theory and an act, a seed and a slash. 1. Topographics. Defined: mapping the invisible. Topographics is not geography, but it is topological. It does not chart physical land, but sacred ground, rhetorical elevations, and intentional collisions. Topographics proposes that beneath every shared space lies a contested field of vision, each human being drawing internal maps of what should happen, where one belongs, and what shape the future ought to take. Prayer, in this context, is not just religious, it is volitional. It is any act of directed hope or invocation toward reality. This includes the silent wish, the whispered mantra, the philosophical ideal, or the desperate inner plea. And here lies the fragment's brilliance. By defining prayer in such universal terms, it broadens the battlefield. We are all praying, knowingly or not. Thus, the enemy of my prayer is the prayer of my enemy is not merely a clever twist of words. It is a diagnosis of human life as lived across opposing blueprints. My vision of the good may require your collapse. Your invocation of justice may negate my very survival. This isn't a critique of prayer, it's a mapping of its consequence, and that is what topographics, as a discipline, studies. The theological paradox: dual invocations to the same sky. Historically, prayer is assumed to be good, pure, and private. But what happens when two devout, sincere people pray for opposite outcomes? The soldier prays to be protected. His enemy prays for his own victory. A mother prays her child be accepted into the academy. Another mother prays the same for hers, and there is only one place. Topographics gives us a grammar for that tension. It does not suggest that God must choose, but that prayer itself is political. It reveals the paradox that the sacred is not always shared. It can be contested. That revelation cracks centuries of naive spiritual optimism and brings us face to face with the ancient truth that not all prayers can coexist. Some are in collision by design. And in that collision, we begin to map invisible war zones, regions of irreconcilable will. Third, conflict as cartography. What this fragment makes possible. The fragment doesn't merely introduce a theory, it creates a lens. Through it, we can reinterpret thousands of prior conflicts, not just as disagreements over facts or resources, but as overlapping terrain of desire. Take international diplomacy. What if every negotiation began not with trade policies, but with a mutual reading of the maps being prayed underneath the table? The ideological cartography, the visions of good, are rarely aligned. When they overlap violently, we call it war. Or take personal relationships. Lovers split not just because of events, but because their sacred maps diverge. He prays for tradition, she prays for freedom. Neither wants the other's ruin. But in topographic terms, their prayers are mutually exclusive overlays, and so the fracture appears, not from hatred, but from a dissonance in the unseen terrain. This fragment gave us the key to that reading. In one sentence, it relocated the battlefield from the field to the will, from the body to the word. Fourth, linguistic genius, the structure of the line. From a purely syntactic standpoint, the sentence is elegant, recursive, and recursive again. The enemy, A, of my prayer. B is the prayer. B of my enemy. A. It reads like a Mobius strip. A folds into B, then B into A. Subject and object reverse, but the sentence doesn't lose its shape. This formal symmetry is not decoration. It mirrors the relational entanglement topographics tries to describe. There is no clean directionality of harm or intention, only mutual contradiction locked in elegant recursion. Such linguistic architecture is rarely accidental, and yet the author of the fragment famously claimed to put ink on paper without knowing what anything meant. That makes this moment even more striking. It suggests the line emerged from the structure of thought itself, not invented but discovered, channeled, perhaps, from the terrain it seeks to name. The field emerges topographics today. 20 years on, topographics has blossomed into a legitimate field of study. Its applications range from trauma cartography, tracing how unspoken intentions map onto physical experience; legal semiotics, where competing constitutional prayers, visions of the good, crash into each other; AI ethics, where machines must navigate prayer-like commands from incompatible human frameworks; diplomatic training, teaching negotiators to locate and name sacred cartographies before any policy is discussed. It all comes from here. The enemy of my prayer is the prayer of my enemy. A line once buried, now revealed. Conclusion: genius in the underheard. What makes topographics genius is not just what it says, but what it made possible. It gave language to a phenomenon we had always felt but couldn't yet trace. It turned an internal ache, "why can't we all get what we want?" into a diagnostic lens on reality. It mapped the sacred collisions of desire. It created a new grammar for understanding invisible war. For years, no one saw the value. The fragment was dismissed as too cryptic, too short, too pretty. But the real genius is this: it is short enough to remember, sharp enough to cut, and wide enough to found a field.